Good morning, every one of you. It's good to have you join me on this Monday, April the 20th. Can you believe about two-thirds of the way through the month of April already? What is one trait that you find difficult to deal with? What is one trait that probably human nature has one of the most difficult times dealing with? You may have different answers to that, but from my perspective, one of the most difficult things I think is patience. It's one of the fruit of the Spirit. It takes the growth of the Spirit. It takes the work of the Spirit in our lives to develop it. Patience. Oh, how we want things accomplished right now. How we want God to answer right now. How we want the answer yesterday, or for sure today. We don't want to wait for tomorrow or the next day. Patience. You know, we want God to bring the person that we're praying, that they will get saved. We want them to be saved now. Or the person we're praying for to be healed, we want them to be healed now. You know, it's kind of like the old saying that I've heard for many years. What does a 500-pound parrot say? Polly wants a cracker now. You know, that's kind of how we are. Kind of like the 500-pound parrot. I want it now, God. I want my answers to prayer now. I want you to accomplish your purpose in me now. The Bible tells us that God's timing is different than ours. His ways are above our ways, and they're different than our ways. Galatians 4:4 says that when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption up to sonship. Notice it says, when the set time had fully come. Do you realize that was thousands of years? Back in Genesis, when the serpent beguiled Eve, and then Eve passed the fruit on Adam, and they both ate and sinned, God gave a promise to Eve and that he would send a deliverer. He would send a deliverer. You realize that took probably 7,000 years for that to happen? God made a promise, and it took thousands of years before it was brought to completion. You talk about God being patient. He was patient. When this time was fully come, things had to be just right. Things had to be perfect for his return or for his coming to earth. We probably are struggling. Many of you are probably struggling with the length of time that the stay-at-home orders have been given, and whether it's an overreach by government or whether it's right or wrong is not my issue today. My issue is it will end when God is ready for it to end, when his purposes are done. We get so impatient with God. We get so impatient with his purposes within our lives. God gave us a promise in Philippians 1:6. And it's basically, let me just read it here for you real quick. It says, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. He began a good work in you. Do you believe that? Do you believe God has begun a good work in you? He has. The work he's begun in you is a good work. And he will bring it to completion, but not until the day of Jesus Christ. That means the whole time we're living on this earth, God is still working on us. He's still working to bring his purposes to completion. The whole time we live here. It's not been accomplished. What he's doing right now in you is part of his long-range plan for you. And so we need to have patience with God and patience with ourselves. We need to live today, one day at a time. Boy, the last few years, I've so come to understand the importance of living one day at a time, living today. We don't have any guarantee for tomorrow in the first place, but living one day at a time. Not worrying about tomorrow, for the worries of today are enough. If we're going to worry about stuff, today's enough. I can trust God for today. And I don't need to trust him for tomorrow, because he'll take care of tomorrow. Patience is so very difficult. And so, let me just challenge you with this thought as well. As you look back over the last week, or maybe let's make it even longer, over the last month, or even longer than that, over the last year, what are some things that God has done in your life? What are some prayers that he has answered? What are some victories that he has given you? What are some accomplishments that have been completed? Look back at those. If God was faithful in bringing those into completion, he will continue to work in the future. You may be praying for that spouse to come to know Christ, or you may be praying for that relative to be healed. Or you may be praying for a new job, or for God to provide it in some other way, and he will. God is faithful. I think back to a time in my life, it was the 1980s, the early 1980s, when inflation was very high, like 15 to 20%. My church had not given me a raise in like 3 years, which means that my income had basically dropped by half. Things were tight, and I was complaining to God. I was complaining about the church not giving me a raise. I was complaining about his provision. I was just plain complaining. And in prayer one day, God spoke to my heart and says, "Who are you complaining to?" And I realized I was really complaining to him. I'm complaining about him. And he said, "Don't you believe that I can take care of you?" At the same time, God was dealing with my wife at home about the very same thing. And when we got home that evening, or when I got home that evening, I told her what God had told me, and that I was complaining to God and that I needed to stop complaining to God. And she said God had spoke to her about the same thing. So we began to trust him at that very moment. Say, "God, we're going to believe you to provide." And over the next 6 months, God provided in just phenomenal ways. I went in one day to pay a doctor's bill at a clinic. And lo and behold, discovered it had been paid in full by somebody else. I to this day, I don't know who paid it, but it had been paid. One Sunday morning after church, a gentleman in our church came up and shook my hand, and he put I could tell he put some money in my hand. And when I had a few moments later to take a look at how much he put in my hand, he put 5 $20 bills, $100. God provided. God did just amazing things, unexpected things to answer our prayer and to meet our need. 6 months later, the church gave me a sizable raise, and all those other things stopped because now God was using the church to meet my need. Well, God has ways of meeting your needs that are beyond your understanding, but you have to trust him. You have to be patient with him and let him do it. So whatever you're dealing with today, be patient with God. Let him fulfill his purposes. God gave God gave Abraham a promise, and he gave Isaac and Jacob promises that he would bring them into a land that flowed with milk and honey, a promised land. Then they get taken away to Egypt, and 400 years later, he fulfills the promise. Actually, 440 years later, because he wandered in the wilderness for 40 more years because of unbelief because they didn't believe God. And so you say, wow, that's a long time between a promise and an answer. Yes. And sometimes that's the way it is in our lives too. It's a long time between a promise and an answer. But God is faithful. And he will meet our needs. He will provide for us. He will take care of us. So trust him. Be patient. Live today. Look for his blessings today. And know that he will provide tomorrow as well. Just something to think about today. God bless you.